Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our latest discussion and debate on the war economy. We've got a fantastic panel, both here and digitally online around the world. Well, actually, I think principally in Paris. But anyhow, I'm not going to go into the detail of all the speakers because they have all of that in your packs and available to you at your fingertips. But I want to get on to the discussion as quickly as possible. So let me just frame the argument to start with, and I'll start with the speakers here, and then we'll go to the speakers online. I think one of the difficulties with the use of the phrase war economy is that we are manifestly not in a war economy. If you talk about a war economy, I think the United States, 1942, 37% of GDP is being spent on defense. We're having an argument about 2%. 90% of the US federal budget is spent on defense. So we're not like that, but we have had, if you like, tremors of war economy. If you think about the energy crisis we had last year, when the European Council in April of 2022 is staring down the abyss of having to potentially operate almost like a war economy in the energy sector. And in any event, we had to spend something like 400 billion euro in subsidies rescuing European business and European consumers. So that was a kind of tremor of war economy. And then there are other elements to this, is if you look at the global economy and see how far, particularly China, has choke points over the West, over the rest of the global economy, these should be of concern and alarm. And one example which I use, which I think is particularly stunning, is like 90% of all the ingredients for medicines in the world are produced in China. Now, the question is when you have that and you replicate it right across all the critical raw materials, semiconductor chips, whatever else you're talking about is critical for running your economies. We may not need a war economy, but do we need to move at far greater speed and decisiveness than we are doing in relation to, say, our chip acts or the critical raw materials policies we've been developing? So I think that's part of the framing. What do we have to do now to assure we don't actually end up having to run an actual war economy? And perhaps the Finance Minister would like to start.
Thank you, and I'm really honored to be invited on such a distinguished panel with people here and on the digital presence. And well, this is a fantastic question for today, and this is, will Europe face wartime economy? Yes, we are in wartime economy now, and I'm as a minister of Baltic, let's say, Republic, Latvia, Baltic state Latvia, I feel we are in wartime economy from the last year, February. And why? Number one is unprovoked aggression against the independent European state, Ukraine, and it is crystal clear we are as a country which is represent the eastern flank of NATO or European Union, we bordering with aggressive state, and of course our full obligation is to give help to the Ukraine as our let's say strong ally in any circumstances. And second aspect of this is why we facing war economy right now. We already having Baltic states and eastern flank of NATO already facing direct impact from this war. Just taking account just a couple of facts like recent situation with pipeline from Estonia to Finland. It is right now is state procuracy said it is man's and work, interconnection, let's say, information cable, two information cables between Finland and Estonia, Sweden. Then everyday situation on Latvian border where we face influx of migration, and this is orchestrated by strong ally of Russia, Belarus. And it is, and then we felt rising impact every day. It is not just 40–50% per day. It's already 250 up to 500 some days, 1,500, and that of course involves our all operational forces into how to stop that, and so on and so on. That is all like last week's 400 emails to Latvian schools to about potential bomb in the schools or kindergartens or whatever, and that's of course we are in a process. What how to say, important to think, how the world. We're all humans, and of course we're trying to adapt the situation, and we really starting gradual change, and also geopolitical shift, particularly recent brutal Hamas attack on Israel has complete change the global world. There is no anymore one point of instability. There are more points of instability, and that is put on in a new complex situation, and we all have to look on the situation from own perspective. Already describes a Baltic, let's say, state finance minister's position, and then I have to put me as a minister of European Union in the situation. And of course, that brings us to a couple of issues where we could look for solution. One is Europe's strategic autonomy. Yeah. We really have to need to ensure our resilience to external shocks. We already faced energy shock. We can't no longer we can't rely on global value chains, as already you mentioned. Self-regulation rules, many other things, and state involvement in the situation become very important. Second, of course, is question about European budget, how in this situation European budget, and I strongly believe European budget should play much bigger role, and of course what is fundamental for European economical autonomy, that is speed of decision. Yeah, that is fundamental. So far we are just okay, we should adjust to that. We have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of rules, and now we have to act fast. Yeah, we do not have time to consider, think, discuss, agree. We really have to really do things. And other fundamental issue, what we really have to consider now is polarization of the fast or very rapid polarization of the world. It's another issue, that's European Union role in the world. Yeah, it is third largest economy with the second largest currency in the world, and it's very important to understand where we're standing and what is our standpoints here, and how we protect peace process in the world. And then, of course, another fundamental issue there is how we funding defense in the Europe. And that's about, and there are two aspects. One is defense budgets in the countries, and on which way we absorb the rising costs there. That is taxpayer money or debt increase, or it's a gradual absorption of fiscal shock. What this rises. And second, of course, is military industry of Europe, and that is again a very complex issue. If we look, for example, Latvia's support for Ukraine. Last year it was close to 1.3% of GDP, and that was a government support, that was military and all kind of human support, or there were a lot of support arranged by society. But it is, if you look at how we support frontline, we're running out of our stocks now, because all necessary equipment starting from first day of assault, where Latvia, Baltic states are.
And this goes to an issue of urgency, that we actually need solutions to that now, because
Exactly.
we need the stocks.
Exactly. Yeah, we need stocks, and that of course bring Latvia to the point we really has to start develop national defense industry to produce simple things. We have to negotiate with our European partners what should be done much faster.
So perhaps I could bring Benjamin at this point in and ask whether or not you think perhaps La Grande Nation is going to save Europe once again and come up with the security and defense projection which will defend Europe. Your view.
Well, first, thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. Look, I think what happened on February 24th last year, the war of aggression against Ukraine, signals, I think, a durable shift for European security, and we have to draw the long-term consequences. And one of the big challenges, and this is where Putin is still hoping to win this war, is that he thinks that we're going to lose the focus, that we're going to divide, that maybe we'll have the U.S. elections pushing the U.S. once again to turn inward, and Europeans not able to sustain the support to Ukraine in the long run. And in addition to this, as was just said, we're seeing an arc of crisis in the neighborhood of Europe, Hamas aggression against Israel. I was there a few days ago, and maybe this turning into something more regional. Armenia, Northern Africa. I think it's necessary for us to take the long-term effort to make it sustainable for us to defend our own security, and it has to be done at the European level. One of it is, of course, we talked about budget. Is building the defense industrial base and the military capabilities together as Europeans and invest in them. I think we were able at the end of COVID to pull together resources, build a recovery package. That was an unprecedented major effort, a success for the European Union. And we have to think about the next step, is how we are able to do this to build common procurement, acquire defense capabilities. The Estonian Prime Minister recently proposed a 100 billion borrowing plan to invest in European defense. I think that's exactly how we need to think about this in the long run. The second aspect, I think, is, and that was also mentioned already, is how do we reduce our dependencies? I think that's also something that the various different crises of the last few years, from COVID to the war against Ukraine, have revealed. We thought that our interdependencies were a strength. We realized when it comes to energy, for example, that there were actually tools and leverage used by autocratic powers like Russia to exert influence in our own democracies. So when it comes to energy, investing in renewables and nuclear energy, together, reindustrialization, being able to protect our industry, I think that's really critical. And I think another aspect I would like to underline, it's maybe slightly different from our conversation, although I think it's quite important. One major political decision that we will have to make in the next years, and maybe once again without the United States, is the question of reconstruction of Ukraine. How do we, beyond supporting Ukraine's heroic war effort, how do we make sure that we anchor Ukraine to Euro-Atlantic institutions? That, I think, is the only path to make sure that this war is a strategic victory for Ukraine, beyond just the resistance and the territorial dimensions. How do we accompany Ukrainians towards Euro-Atlantic institutions? A big part of it will be reconstruction. I think there's a debate that we're not having enough right now, I think, in Europe, is the question of Russian frozen assets in Europe and the United States, by the way. We have 200 billion euros of frozen central bank assets in reserves in Europe, about 100 billion in the United States. And there's a real question to be asked whether European taxpayers should be paying when we have frozen these assets, at the very least, like the European Commission has proposed, we could invest these assets and take the return on investments, or even consider that Russia is, as a sovereign state, is responsible for the aggression against Ukraine, use those funds to fund the reconstruction. So I mean, these are just a few quick topics I would throw out there, but I definitely think that I don't know if it's thinking about war economy, but there's clearly a sustainable shift that might accelerate in a brutal way if Donald Trump is reelected president of the United States. That forces us, I think, to think together about building the resources and the tools to be able to defend European security.
Yes, Benjamin, to some degree what you're saying is that we may not be that interested in strategic autonomy, but strategic autonomy may be interested in us, that we may have no alternative. On that note, I'll turn to Eva.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm really honored to be here, so thanks for invitation. When I was thinking about this war economy coming here, I thought, what is the definition? Because I think if we talk about what you were talking, fully centralized, more than 50% resource from GDP donated to military, like weapon production or so, I would think that this is the last resort where we want to end up. So I think we are already in sort of war economy, but sort of a bit more mild war economy. On one hand, I think that we have waken up, as finance minister said, from last year's February. On the other hand, I think that we are still walking a little bit like half asleep, that we are not really woken up yet. And therefore, I was thinking that for me, this war economy probably needs a bit more expansion. So one thing is really like production and services, what we do and how much we dedicate really to the military and war. But then I would like to add one thing, which is society and society's engagement into this process. And the third thing to add is financial system. And when we talk about production and services, of course, I'm very much pro about this self-sufficient Europe. I think we need to think about being autonomy. We have faced it, all these challenges already during pandemic. I think we have not learned fully from that. But if we go further, when we think about society's engagement, it's extremely important for all of us to understand why we are going into this war economy. What do we want to achieve? And I think somehow to communicate more and more and not to lose this long-term goal that we want to keep democratic market economies in our part of the world. Mm-hmm. And if society doesn't really get it, why do we do? Then we are facing cyber threats. We will lack resilience, and we will be as weak as the weakest point in the chain. Mm-hmm. For example, cyber resilience of our companies. If we will be faced with threats, what was mentioned, like emails, whatever other cyber attacks, we will not have time to rectify it. We will not have money to rectify if some of our companies are just shut down because of cyber attacks. I think society should be aware that this is the aim why we are doing it. And then when it comes to the banking and being a backbone of economy, financial system, we have been a significant tool to implement all the sanctions, to control and to protect ourselves from money flowing to high-risk countries and to really see this transparency. But again, if I'm looking backwards, what has happened in the last 2 years, maybe since February, not full 2 years, but still, payments to high-risk countries, to Russia, to Belarus, has decreased by 60–70%. When we look on the export has grown, so the goods are still flowing to Russia, to Belarus. different ways, ways how to probably avoid the sanctions. And therefore, what I'm saying, we really need to get this awareness of society. So it's not about separate discussion what politicians are doing, what the banks are doing, and what economy or companies are doing. We need to understand the larger goal, where are we going and what we want to achieve. And that probably can be done only with communication and trying to find a common cooperation.
That's really good. That's a really interesting overview. And I'd now like to move to getting an OECD view. Mame is ready to give her to Pennyworth on the situation. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent, really great.
Okay, hopefully it works. And also sorry not to be there in person with you. You have a beautiful panel on stage. Maybe just one general observation about the impact of the war and maybe three policy questions. I mean, in terms of the impact, as we've seen, the energy shock has pushed up inflation to levels that hadn't been seen for many decades. It has lowered economic growth all around the world, particularly in Europe. And we've seen also interest rates rising to rates that hadn't been seen in a long time. So now we are faced with a lot of uncertainty because of the uncertainty around the war itself and the potential for new disruptions in global energy and food markets. And I think another aspect too is that the war has eroded the commitment to multilateral free trade. This had already started during the COVID-19 pandemic, which already raised concerns about the advantages of global trade. And of course, with the war, the supply chain vulnerabilities have been exposed even more. So related to this, another theme that has been exposed following the invasion of Ukraine is how to manage shortages and the vulnerability of economies. So we are seeing some shifts in global supply chains that are related to geopolitical tensions and the war in Ukraine. There's a rise in export restrictions, and we're actually trying to measure them. And in recent years, about 10% of the global value of exports of critical raw materials, for example, faced at least one export restriction measure. And of course, OECD countries have been increasingly exposed to the use of these export restriction measures for critical raw materials that are coming from Asia, Russia, and countries in Africa. So this is, let's say, more for the observation. Let me go back to the policies. What to do then to manage this war economy, as you call it. The first is maybe to think about how to manage high energy prices, manage energy disruptions. So we've seen over the past few years that fiscal policy played a vital role in supporting the economy through the shock. The war has led many countries to introduce new measures, such as subsidies to cushion the impact of high food and energy prices on households and businesses. The fiscal costs are very large, although they vary across countries. So for the median OECD country, support for example, just for energy of consumers was a bit less than 1% of GDP, 0.7%, 0.8% in 2023. But in some countries, it has been 3 times that, 2 to 3% of GDP. Our view is that many of these fiscal support measures, including the remaining energy support schemes, need now to be scaled back and to become better targeted to those that really need them, particularly the households rather than firms that are not adequately covered by the existing social protection systems. And then the last point that I want to touch on briefly is on the impact on public finances related to the rise of defense spending. So you've mentioned this issue, and indeed across G20 countries, what we had been observing over the past few years, let's say even over the past 3 decades, it is that defense spending relative to GDP had declined markedly. It was an average of close to 4% in the 1970s, and it went down to a little bit over 2%. And in recent years, however, especially since 2022, many OECD countries have increased defense spending. So in relative terms, this has been particularly strong in countries that were long-standing NATO members, where the joint spending on defense declined from about 3% of GDP to 1.5% since the year 2000. And other countries still have plans to increase this defense spending. We've actually at the OECD been looking into that, the defense spending and its increase and what it means for managing the budgets in our member countries. And as with other areas, we think that now is the time to really think about improvements in efficiency, which could help to contain the budget costs of achieving the intended improvements. And in addition, some expenditure reprioritization will have to be undertaken, including by reviewing existing expenditures to identify the potential where there could be potential efficiency gains. Because the issues that we had when we came out of COVID-19 and even before, of course, have not disappeared with the war. And it is, we think now is the time that countries can rebuild fiscal buffers to prepare for long-term challenges, such as population aging, for example, in Europe, where a priority is really to extend working lives and to build buffers to manage future budgets. So with this, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. That's actually quite interesting, because one of the points there is about the efficiency of expenditure. And of course, one of our great problems in the European defense sector is that we end up paying so much more than the Americans, because we don't actually have a European defense market, a single European defense market, for a whole host of historical, bureaucratic, and regulatory and political reasons. So one of the issues is, and if we're going to get anything like a bang for buck for that additional expenditure, we have to sort out the European defense market, and that's one difficult thing to deal with, but surely the pressures upon us are such that we have to do something. Anyhow, the other question about that takes you to the issue of funding, and that takes me to Eurogroup Pascal, and perhaps you may have some observations on where we go from here. Pascal.
Oh, I do indeed. I do indeed, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate digitally. I'm sorry I don't have the opportunity to visit Riga again, and I want to just acknowledge the contributions that have been made by the panel there, and in particular by my colleague and your Finance Minister, Arvels, who has spoken about many of the challenges that he faces as we consider the impact of the war in Ukraine on his economy and on the economy of the euro area. And perhaps what I'll do in responding back to your point is just acknowledge the debate that is underway in your panel there regarding the concept of a wartime economy and whether our national economies have acquired that status or whether we are moving to it. And I think we can make the case for saying that we're in economies that are very much defined by war at the moment and by the economic consequences of a war, but are perhaps not yet at the point where they can be defined fully as a wartime economy as it has been traditionally defined. So if I could outline 3 different ways in which the economy has had such an impact on our, the war has had such an impact on our economies, but just acknowledge 3 points of difference where we perhaps have not yet got to the point where our economies are fully defined by the impact of the war. Your panelists have covered some of the areas already that have led to the war having had such an impact on our economies. And I'll just again mention two of them that have been already acknowledged, but perhaps give a bit more prominence to one. So undoubtedly, if you look at the degree to which defence expenditure is now significantly growing across our economies at the moment, that is the clearest example of how the war has affected the organisation of our economies and the economic activity that they're involved in. Secondly, if you look at the policy focus that all governments at the moment have on dealing with the economic consequences of the war, this is an issue that either at finance minister level and head of government level has been a defining feature of all of the work that we have done since the early days of the invasion. And there's one other way in which our economies have become increasingly defined by war that perhaps we haven't discussed fully yet in this panel, which is, of course, the role of sanctions. The effort that goes into the design of sanctions, and then the huge effort that has gone into the implementation of sanctions. And this has been a really big area of focus by foreign ministers and also by finance ministers since the war began. And all that being said, I think there's a number of different areas in which our economies have not yet been fully defined by the war, but that of course could change. The first one is we still have private sectors all over our economy that may be affected by the war, but his focus is on other things apart from meeting the production needs that are necessary to either fund or be involved in this war itself. And all over the euro area and all over Europe at the moment, we have private sectors that, despite the inflationary impact of the war and despite growth beginning to come down, are still at very, very high levels of employment. Secondly, we're not yet at the point where we are centrally directing where the productive capacity of our economies go. We have economies that are producing many other things, but Arvils made the point at the start of his contribution that this may be something that could get changed as we look at the ammunition, as we look at the munitions that will be necessary to continue to support the people of Ukraine. And then finally, and this goes back to the key point that you put to me, we still have financing conditions that are quite conventional, that are not yet defined by a war. So economies still have to worry about public debt. They still have to observe financial markets beginning to normalize from in terms of their attitude towards borrowing, despite the fact that we live in a world now that has many different conflicts underway. And that, I think, is part of the answer back to your own question regarding how this will be funded. And the answer is that in funding this in the time ahead, it's likely to be in terms of levels of borrowing that will also have a cost against it. And this is why the work that we're doing in fiscal rules within the European Union is so important, to give greater confidence to financial markets regarding our ability to fund that debt. So overall, I think our economies are increasingly defined by the war, but I don't think we're quite yet at the traditional definition of what wartime economies would look like.
Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive kind of overview. I recognise we've got about 25 minutes left. So what I'm thinking is really is to get some interaction from the audience to any of the panelists, online or offline. I see a gentleman in a grey suit in towards the back. Perhaps we could get a microphone to him. It's the usual rule, name and institution.
Sure, thanks. My name is Viesturs Berziņš. I'm the president of IATA Latvia, and I wanted to ask a question mostly to Mr. Asher-Adens, but also to the whole panel if you want to respond. So in the Baltics and in Poland, we've been hearing talks not only about 2% of the GDP going to the military, but maybe even 4%. Poland is already there. Latvia, Lithuania will get there if we're not there already. And my question is, you've talked about a lot about efficiency. But we cannot really talk about efficiency if there are still many NATO states who haven't even reached the 2%, and even if they are saying they're trying to, they're not really showing that. So I wanted to ask, how do we motivate these NATO member states to reach the 2%? Thank you.
Well, Minister, it's a great question, of course. Regarding Latvia, yes, I didn't heard any formal format where should we discuss about 4%, but already in basic state papers we have agreement on year 27, there will be 3%, and already we would say gradually adapting to that, balancing between taxpayer money and external debt. If you look on Europe average, that is 1.3, and how to say, at the beginning, I tried to say we all need to adopt our policies to new realities, and that is really a wake-up call. And we have to understand that Russia, if we look on general perspective on this aggression, on Russian aggression in Ukraine, we have to understand at the moment there is no, how to say, no algorithm how to solve this conflict. And it's crystal clear it will not end next year or recognize future. And many audience, we're talking long-term war. And that's number one. Second is we have to understand that is Russia constantly monitoring Europe as potential how to say, next target, and then we have to understand that deterrence policy is fundamental. And in taking this in account, we really have to discuss that around European countries, how we increase our let's say, military spendings. And of course, we can't say very little happened. No, it's totally opposite. And we have to just remember what has happened with Germany. Yeah, you understand? We have to remember first German government reactions and how the Germany had completely changed their policies. And that I see in dialogue with other country representatives. That happens. Our governments understand that's important. We have to develop capacity of military capacity. We have to develop military industry, and that's changing. But I understand. I want to say your question is relevant. Yeah, and that is fundamental. And this is fundamental part of deterrence policy. Yeah, as we will be strong, we will be prepared. There will be no enemy attack on us.
Thank you. Does anyone else online want to chip in? Yes, Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really important question. First, I do want to acknowledge here that countries in Central and Eastern Europe have shown great leadership and example when it comes to military spending and taking on more responsibility. But of course, we're seeing a broader shift. I think what's coming out of Germany since the famous Zeitenwende speech goes clearly in the right direction, is very encouraging. We in France have just passed a few months ago a defense budget bill for the next 5 years. So basically over 10 years, the 2 terms of the Macron presidency will have doubled our military budget. But I still hope that it continues beyond that. It needs to be a generational effort. One of the things I would say, because you asked what could incentivize countries to spend more and do more, I would hope that the world situation around us is incentive enough. But I think one thing that's really key is developing our own European industrial defense base. And that's a conversation we need to have with our American friends as well. When we've seen a lot of the pressure that's come from the United States to have access to the funds from the European Defense Fund, which was only 7 billion euros. That's a drop in the ocean when it's compared to the US defense budget. And I'm saying this because I think that it's really important. I speak, as a former think tanker who's now in elected office. we need to show also to our populations that investment in defense will trickle down in terms of jobs, in terms of investment in our country, and not only to go to purchase equipment abroad. I think it's really important to get sustainable public support for increasing defense budget, especially in countries with budgetary constraints, high debt environment, where if you increase military spending, you're going to have to take from somewhere else. So I think here, really developing our own defense base and making sure that it trickles down to our own economies is really critical.
I think this issue to do with industrial capacity is critical. The difficulty, I suppose, is that we don't actually have a single market for defense, and the regulatory and bureaucratic barriers are really significant. And that's one of the difficulties we have here with this. I mean, one of my observations on this is that perhaps what we need is some sort of defense production community where we basically turbocharge that at speed with the necessary financial support to actually make it happen. And you could argue that we have the basis of it within the single market. We could, the Commission and institutions can be deployed for this, and it could be for amongst the coalition of the willing. You could have the Brits and the Ukrainians involved as well, something like that.
Yeah, yes? There is just one practical but very important detail. If we're speaking about development of industry, defense industry, then as we naturally coming to the issue of financing.
Yeah.
And then we're coming to the interesting point. Conventional banks, they are actually in their ethical codes are not allowed to finance any lethal weapons, or they're not interested to involve in this. Even that issue could be addressed on European big institutional bank, European Investment Bank or whatever. They are not having their practices to finance, at least financing, I don't know, facilities for military industry. And right now we have to rely only on budgetary or government financing here. And that is another fundamental issue what we have to reconsider, at least in Europe, to how to build new policies there. Yeah, because those industries will face rapid development, and no doubt they will need a lot of financing in the future.
I mean, we end up with a kind of almost a European defense bank in order to actually to jumpstart it and move at speed, or a European defense facility in some form.
Exactly.
No, as I represent the banking sector, so I probably will share some view. The banking sector is very cautious when it comes to the lethal weapons, as you said, but when it comes to defense, which also includes lethal weapons, because now we are in the war. Of course, every single bank will have a different policies and strategies depending on their shareholders, but at least I represent a bank where we are financing defense, and we are really stepping into such projects as well, not only in Baltics, but also broader Europe. So I think that there is opportunity. But when this motivation question was how to motivate to spend more, I think, of course, it depends very much where we are. Like in Latvia, as you said, Minister, that we are closer to 3% on European average, it's 1.3. And then I think what I started, that we need society's engagement, because for politicians to take some more motivational or drastic rules regarding the expenditure, you need support from society. Society, of course, in Latvia, we are so close to the borders that we are probably much more motivated to support our government in spending. But further you go into Europe, less support from society you will get. So I think communication with societies, with your citizens, is the must to really demonstrate why do we do, because the long-term war brings enormous damage to our societies.
Absolutely. And the problem is that what we're looking at now is, as the Minister said earlier, a long-term war.
Exactly.
And preparing for that, both militarily and economically, is a very significant challenge. Now, I'm looking across the audience, and I'm looking for more questions. Lady. Towards the back. Thank you very much. Can you get a microphone? As usual, name and institution, please. And then question.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Irma Kalnija, a member of Parliament. While you were talking, I had a momentary brainstorm, and I'd like to ask your opinion on what you would think about war bonds. Because Canada issued war bonds in October 2022, Ukraine issued them as well, and if the thought is about initiating public support, in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, I think this would be something to consider. War bonds. Thank you.
Any observations, Minister? You're a Minister of Finance about war bonds. Are we there yet?
Yes, but again, it depends on. It's very much depends on how a conflict is escalating, and on very difficult circumstances. That is way how states normally finance their military needs. We are not at this stage at the moment, and we can operate on existing let's say income resource what we have now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the issue is, as I was trying to mentally remember, was there any occasion when any democratic state in the 20th century issued war bonds before the war began? I don't think that happened. So perhaps the answer is when Article 5 is triggered, but not till then. So that won't be. Hopefully that when is only an if, but we will see. Do I see a question from Mr. Bond?
2 fingers, perhaps.
Okay.
2 fingers?
Okay. There is a microphone coming.
Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform. So the 2 fingers was, do we wait till the war has started before we start issuing war bonds? Well, if I look at the way that the Russian budget has been recast for next year, it's pretty clear that Putin thinks that he is now in a major war, even if he's still calling it a special military operation. And I think if your adversary thinks he's in a war, whether you want to be or not, you are too. So I rather like the idea of war bonds. Sounds like a good idea to me. While I have the microphone in my hand, I'm going to abuse it and ask Pascal Donoghue. The Stability and Growth Pact has a general escape clause for times of economic crisis. Should it not be, I mean, clearly at the time that it was drafted, nobody thought there was going to be another major war in Europe. But should it not actually be re-examined and amended so that in times of continental emergency like this, there is an escape clause?
Pascal?
Okay, so thank you very much for your question. So as you'll know, the decision in relation to the general escape clause is a decision that's taken by our commission rather than by ministers or by governments. And the commission have been very clear in asserting that the general escape clause will not be activated for a further year, and that it was in place to deal with the funding needs of COVID, and that we need to, because of the impact of inflation on our economies, we need to go back to more normal budgetary policies across next year and beyond, and gradually reduce public borrowing. And they have been very clear that the general escape clause will be deactivated, and I believe that is the right approach. I believe it is important that we send a clear signal to finance ministers and to governments that the very high level of borrowing that we had during the year of COVID, it's not sustained, it's not continued, because if it is, it runs the risk that it will only add to inflation and have a further big impact on living standards within the European Union. I would make the point, though, that I think it is important not to get excessively focused on decisions such as the general escape clause. I think it's important to be equally aware of the views of financial markets. And financial markets are gradually changing the rates of interest upon which they are charging governments to give them money. And we have seen over the last year and a half, bond yields all over the European Union go up. And they're gone up for a number of different reasons. But I believe that general normalization of the borrowing conditions within which governments operate is going to continue. And that is going to be the constraints within which governments will need to operate, as opposed to whether the Commission were to make a different decision regarding the general escape clause, which will mean trade-offs and it will mean challenges in the time ahead, as many different governments need to borrow to fund defence expenditure, exactly at the time in which financial market conditions are continuing to get more normal.
Well, that is kind of rather sobering, but I also wonder if whatever the circumstances are now, the question surely is how much worse it could be. I mean, if you have a situation where there is Article 5 is infringed, presumably at that point, one way or another, the general escape clause would be used in a conflict situation. And I suppose the point is at that point, the frame of reference so dramatically changes that we would have some form of war economy at that point, because we would be at war. So that would change the entire dynamic. So I suppose that to some degree it's like it's a kind of chicken egg thing. We're not there yet, but if we got there, then the entire frame of reference changes.
Alan, I don't know whether you can hear me. Alan?
Sorry?
Yep.
Alan, this is me, Miguel Otero. I don't know whether you can hear me. I'm one of the panelists.
Ah, hello!
Can you hear me?
Because you're not on screen. Miguel, you're not on screen.
I should be on screen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but we can't see you.
Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Important is that you can hear me. And my sincere apologies, because somehow I thought that the time zone in Riga and Madrid would be the same. Obviously it's not.
This would explain it.
So my apologies, and I should have 5 minutes.
So Miguel, we've got 7 minutes left. Would you like to contribute? That would be great.
Yes, I would like, and I had 5 minutes. I just need 2 or 3 minutes to contribute. And I think, I've been listening the past half an hour, and I thought that it could be useful to have a conceptual framework in what we are dealing with. We are dealing with 3 transitions, right? We talk about the 3 transitions: the green, the digital, and increasingly the economic security transition. You can put in as well strategic autonomy, defense spending. You can include that as well there. And my view is that Europe faces a trilemma, and it follows up nicely from what Pascal just said, perhaps with a different approach. But it seems to me the trilemma is the following. Can we do the 3 transitions? Can we increase production in Europe, in defense, in equipment, in digital, just in industry, more industry? And can we have fiscal discipline? It seems to me that these 3 poles, the 3 transitions, more production, more industrial capacity needed for these 3 transitions, and fiscal prudence, fiscal discipline in times of great power rivalry, and these 3 transitions is impossible. We need to take 2 out of those, and I would say that perhaps the one that needs to go is fiscal discipline. I know Pascal might not be agreeing with that, but that's my contribution to this discussion.
That's a kind of interesting contribution, and I suppose if you look at the history of democratic states in wartime, you end up having significant fiscal indiscipline, if you might say, with, you know, I think what was the height was, I think it was 300, was it US the US debt GDP was 300% of GDP in 1945. And, you know, you accept that as the cost of winning the war. And so that's, and then you just basically pay it down over the next decade. And of course, the US by 1965, the economy was 5 times as large, so it didn't really matter, you know? You just grow your economy. That's, I suppose, is the solution. That's how you deal with the fiscal indiscipline. Well, that's the precedent. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left. Any more questions for our entire panel? It's very quiet. I'm going to have to be forced to look at the questions online. Somebody
I see I was very convincing. I see I was very convincing, Alan.
Okay, well, we've got a question on sanctions. It says here, it says, can sanctions effectively deter an aggressor? Do they need to be supplemented with other strategies to safeguard European security and economic stability? So, Eva, what do you think?
I think we have now implemented 11 packages of EU sanctions, and it has been quite a journey for the financial industry to apply them, interpret them, to cooperate with politicians, with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, etc., etc. So, and at the same time, as I said, even though we have implemented all this enormous legislation block, and we still see that the goods are exported, money is still coming and moving between the countries, EU countries and Russia. So it is a bit tricky. I'm not so convinced that sanctions is the only tool which will solve Russia's disability to go further in the war. So I think that it's just one part of the puzzle.
And the part of the trouble is also is one has to always recognize the adaptation on the other side. So you see you've got a number of things going on. You get substitution, importation from the Russian perspective, Allied States, which is China and elsewhere, and of course subversion of the sanctions via bringing product into, we won't name states, but alternative states through which the relevant sanctioned products are able to move. So there is an issue, but of course we can tighten it up to some degree, we can create a stronger regime to some degree, but there's always going to be adaptation. And adaptation, and you have to think through the...
And it takes time.
And it takes time, and you know, the other issue is a point, is the sanctions model, the modern sanctions model is really Iran. And the problem with the sanctions model of Iran is that it's how can I put this? It was a very stable model developed by the US Treasury in the 1970s and thereafter. It didn't change very much. What we're dealing with now is something which is tremendously rapidly and dynamically changing and developing all the time. And it's very, very difficult to be sure that the sanctions regime can work in the way that we need it to work compared to what we were dealing with back in the 70s and 80s. So that's really difficult. So I've got about a minute left. Any more questions, comments, observations? No? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank our panel, online or offline, early and late. I'd like to thank them all, and perhaps we could thank them all in the usual way. Thank you very much. Okay.